85, 90 the other side.
على كل ديفيد بدنا نتابع الحديث عن كتابك، وبعد الفاصل رح نحكي على الثورة الإسلامية بإيران والزلزال اللي وصلت تردداته إلى لبنان. بعد الفاصل. عودة لمتابعة ترانزيت. ديفيد، بكتابك خصصت مساحة واسعة ودقيقة للحديث عن الثورة الإسلامية بإيران، يعني نظرة آية الله الخميني إلى الصراع مع إسرائيل كوسيلة لتوحيد القوى الإسلامية. حكيت عن التحالف الإيراني السوري اللي ولدوا العداء المشترك لصدام حسين وترجم فعليا في لبنان. يعني السؤال، في كثير من الكتاب والدبلوماسيين راهنوا على الابتعاد ما بين سوريا وإيران، رغم ذلك دام هذا التحالف 30 سنة ولا يزال حتى الآن ربما أقوى من السابق. أين برأيك يختلف المشروع الإيراني عن الأهداف السورية؟
Yes, this alliance is perhaps the most enduring alliance in the Middle East, and you could say it's a rather unnatural, unusual alliance. A, because it's an alliance between an Arab state and a non-Arab state, sometimes seen as being at the expense of other Arab states, and two very different kinds of regimes, Ba'athist secular Syria and Islamist Iran. It has withstood all attempts to break it apart for 30 years, and as you say, it seems to survive and even get stronger. Well, clearly the two sides find a common interest, and on Syria's part, it began essentially, or grew out of the Iraqi-Iranian the hostility between the two Ba'athist regime. When the Islamic Revolution took place, President Assad saw a valuable potential ally in the similarly anti-Iraqi Islamic regime. That was the origin of it. But it's grown into something very different and much more far-reaching than that since. The Syrians, in some sense, they are, the linchpin of the Arab system, as we call it. They consider themselves the heart of Arabism and the main champions of the prime Arab cause, the Palestinian cause. But they are weak in various ways vis-a-vis those whom they're confronting, led by Israel. So naturally they seek strength elsewhere. And they find it in Iran, they find it via their proxies in Lebanon, Hezbollah, and also, we could say by extension, in Hamas. So that is the essential basis of the relationship.
يعني كل المحاولات اللي جرت لتصدير الثورة الإسلامية ونموذجها بمناطق عديدة من العالم فشلت إلا بلبنان. لماذا برأيك؟
Well, you can't say no. I don't call Lebanon an Islamic country.
يعني بذلك مش دولة إسلامية، إنما نموذج حزب الله اللي هو يعتبر حليف أساسي لإيران.
Well, yes, indeed. I mean, you could say that in its foreign policy, you could argue that what the Iranians have achieved in Lebanon is their greatest continuing success. I wouldn't disagree with that. But it is, Hezbollah now plays a role on its own, you know, it's a force in its own right.
يعني هل تعني انه حزب الله اليوم يعني انت كتبت بكتابك انه بدأ صعود حزب الله مع بداية الثورة الإسلامية ولا سيما من بعد الاجتياح الإسرائيلي بالعام 82. هل كان في عامل مساعد لنمو حزب الله؟
Well, I say three factors. I say that one was the Islamic Revolution. That was one, so to speak, parent or progenitor of Hezbollah. I say that the other one was Israel, and that is what Nasrallah himself has once said, that Israel created conditions in Lebanon which enabled the rise of a movement like Hezbollah. And I say that, in a way, Syria was the third party, but a sort of midwife. But the two main creators were Israel and a conjunction of the Islamic Republic and Israel.
متى تحولت فعليا يعني علاقة إيران وإسرائيل إلى عداء برأيك؟ يعني نحن بنعرف أنه بكتابك أيضا ذكرت أنه من 79 لمنتصف الثمانينات كانت ما تزال إسرائيل تعتبر إيران حليف استراتيجي، وحتى إيران لم تتردد في قبول الدعم الإسرائيلي في حربها على العراق.
That's correct. Iran used to be a member of what the Israelis called the Alliance of the Periphery. They had a strategy of trying to develop relationships with states basically surrounding the Arab world, because they saw the Arab world naturally enough as the main, their main threat and their main enemy. And they tried to develop relationships with those who were potentially hostile to the Arabs in their turn, Iran, Ethiopia, Turkey, and so on. But when the Islamic Revolution took place, there was a complete and radical change in the attitude of the new Iran to Israel. It became deeply ideologically hostile. But the Israelis kept trying to preserve the notion of Iran as an ally. When the hostage crisis took place in Lebanon, the Israelis were prime movers in supplying arms to the Iranians, along with the Americans, but they encouraged the Americans to do that. This was not really to help the American hostages. It was to try and regain Iran as a friend. They felt that Iran would never renounce what Israelis considered to be its historic national interest, which would cause it to maintain a friendship with the Arabs' other enemy, the Israelis themselves. And they maintained this until as late as the 1991, 92, 93, so much so that at that time the Israelis were urging the Americans not to take seriously Iran's threats against Israel.
بكتابك بصفحة 185 بتتحدث عن عرض سخي يعني قدمته إيران إلى سوريا بإرسال 40,000 مقاتل زائد 10,000 من الحرس الثوري لصد الاجتياح الإسرائيلي على لبنان، والأهم من العرض رفض سوريا لهذا العرض، واللي اعتبرته برأيك اللحظة اللي كانت مفصلية بتاريخ المنطقة. كيف بمجرد رفضت سوريا العرض الإيراني ممكن هالقد يترك تبعات، واللي حكيت عنه أيضا بكتابك، على الوضع الحالي الذي ما زلنا نعيشه في لبنان؟
Yes, it's true. The Iranians, partly it was a kind of gratitude. I think, on the part of the Iranians for the help which Syria had given them in their war against Iraq. But yes, they did offer to send a large number of troops, but President Assad apparently refused that because I think he felt that it wouldn't make any practical difference in his struggle with Israel, military struggle, confrontation with Israel in Lebanon. It was already too late. The Israelis had already inflicted very heavy damage on his army and on his air force. And they felt that it would invite yet greater Israeli response, which might lead to, I feel, the overthrow of his regime.
بعد الفاصل رح نكمل الحديث عن حزب الله، كيف تحول من دولة مصغرة في لبنان إلى حزب سياسي جهادي بعد الفاصل. عودة لمتابعة ترانزيت مع ديفيد هيرست. ديفيد، يعني أنت بتشرح عن طريقة عمل حزب الله بكتابك من خلال وجهتي نظر، الأولى جهادية وكفاح مسلح، الوجهة الثانية أو الأسلوب الثاني تصفه بالبراغماتي والتدريجي. يعني فهمك لحزب الله هو بالتنقل بين هذين الأسلوبين، اشرح لي كيف يعني.
Well, a basic thesis of my book is this, that Hezbollah, it says itself that the prime, at this juncture anyway, the prime activity of jihadism, as they understand it, I mean, of course it's to create an Islamic order everywhere, but in practical terms at the moment, the main active field for this is jihad in the military sense, vis-a-vis Israel. Now, but Hezbollah is, I think, a very intensely ideological movement. You might almost call it messianic movement. But also, its leadership is clearly very politicians and realists and pragmatists. And they know when they have to, they cannot practice jihadism in its pure military form without risking their whole enterprise. I mean, that became particularly clear after the year 2000, when they had achieved this great triumph, being the only Arab party ever to have expelled the Israelis from any Arab territory. It was a great victory, but it posed a dilemma, because jihad for Hezbollah, as I said, is, well, liberating Jerusalem. That's their official aim.
ما بتعتقد انه اعاد يعني وجهة نظره تغيرت مع الوثيقة التي قدمها بالعام 2009، وثيقة حزب الله؟
Which one?
وثيقة السياسية التي قدمها حزب الله في العام الماضي، وأعاد قراءة كل العمل السياسي والعمل الجهادي فيها. ما بتعتبر أنه في تغيير حصل؟
Yeah. Well, there is a change. I mean, but I was going to illustrate my point by saying that pure jihadism after 2000 would have been far too dangerous, because the world accepted the idea that Hezbollah was at that before 2000 was really liberating Lebanese national territory. But anything that it did thereafter, militarily speaking, would be this much greater, higher ambition, the pursuit of jihad. So it changed its strategy. It became pragmatic. It renounced resistance in the full sense of the word and resorted to those tactics which did involve some military action, which continued until the 2006 war. Similarly, it renounced its ambitions, its official ambitions, to Islamicize its environment, namely in Lebanon. I mean, but it did that not just with the document, the recent document you were talking about. It's been evolving for a long time, ever since Hezbollah basically emerged on the scene. I mean, let's say after the 1990s, it began to integrate itself into the Lebanese politics, and something which it had rejected in its early, purely ideological phase. So it's a continuing process. But does it mean that it's renounced its higher ideological aims? I don't think so.
ديفيد، أنت من الصحفيين القلائل يعني وخاصة الصحفيين الغربيين اللي بيعتبر أنه حزب الله دائما في حروبه كان المنتصر. في سؤال يعني انطرح بالإعلام الدولي والعربي بعد العدوان الإسرائيلي بال2006 أنه من كان المنتصر؟ أنت دائما تقول أنه حزب الله كان المنتصر في كل الحروب.
Well, it's a kind of cliche among military historians and so on that a guerrilla movement wins if it doesn't lose. I mean, if it's not defeated. It won in terms definitely of the expectations which both sides, Israel and Hezbollah, had when the war